Tonight, I have a story for you that's genuinely unsettling. It comes from a park ranger who spent years working deep in the backcountry, miles from any sign of civilization. He thought he'd seen it all, from wildfires to close calls with wildlife. But nothing prepared him for what happened one summer. He was stationed at a remote outpost, a tiny cabin with a single radio for communication. His job was to patrol a vast, rugged wilderness area. One night, a massive thunderstorm rolled in. Lightning lit up the sky, and the thunder was so loud it shook the cabin walls. Just as he was about to turn in, his radio crackled to life. It was a faint, distorted voice, barely audible over the static and the storm. He tried to respond, asking who was calling, but the only thing he could make out were fragments of words, panicked and desperate. The signal was weak, bouncing off the mountains. He spent the next hour trying to establish clear contact, but the voice would fade in and out, always sounding terrified. Eventually, the storm passed and the radio went completely silent. The next morning, he checked the logs. No hikers were registered in that sector. No other rangers were scheduled to be nearby. It was a complete mystery. He reported the incident, but with no missing persons reports and no distress calls logged at the main station. There was nothing to follow up on. He tried to brush it off as a strange radio echo or a prank, but he couldn't shake the feeling of raw fear in that voice. A few weeks later, he was on a routine patrol several miles from his cabin. In a section of the park so dense and overgrown that few people ever ventured there. That's when he found it. Tucked away under a thicket of ferns was an old, dilapidated backpack. It was weathered and torn, as if it had been out in the elements for a long, long time. Curious, he opened it. Inside, among some moldy clothes and an empty water bottle, was a small handheld radio, the same model used by amateur radio enthusiasts. The battery was dead, of course. But tucked into a side pocket was a small, water-damaged journal. He carefully opened it. The pages were stuck together, but he managed to read the last few entries. The writer described being lost, their supplies running low. They wrote about strange noises at night, the feeling of being watched, and a growing sense of dread that felt almost supernatural. The final entry was a frantic, barely legible scrawl. It described a terrible storm approaching and a last, desperate attempt to call for help on their radio before the entry just stopped. Mid-sentence. The ranger stood there in the dead silence of the forest, the journal in his hand. He suddenly felt a cold chill run down his spine, a feeling he had never experienced before in all his years in the wild. He realized he had heard the final moments of this person's life. A ghostly echo of their desperation carried on the storm. He packed everything up and hiked out, but the memory of that voice on the radio, and the unfinished sentence in the journal, has haunted him ever since. He never found out who the person was. They remain another one of the countless souls swallowed by the wilderness. Thanks for listening, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories from the dark.